Now, I've known Bruce for 15 hours now. And the one thing that I can definitely say is that Bruce has integrity. Integrity and principles. No, wait, that's two things. Okay, so yeah, he has two things. He has integrity and he has principles and honesty. No, that's three. Okay, let's recap. He has honesty, integrity, and principles. So, Bruce, you're hip. So, right now you're probably asking yourself, okay, he possesses honesty, integrity, and principles. What the heck is he doing in politics? Politics has become a mug's game in the late 20th century. It seems to be permeated more by con artists and thieves than by people of principle. Bruce's mission as an independent MP is to drag politics and political thought, kicking and screaming if he has to, directly from the 19th century right into the 21st century. We're just going to bypass the 20th and just plop it right into the 21st century. He has some rather interesting concepts on how to bring that about. I've read them, I support them. I think they're innovative and they're very easy to enact. Some fellow named Einstein said that it was impossible to correct problems using the same thinking that created the problems in the first place. This, to me, has been the overarching problem with politics for the past 50 years. It's time that we did start thinking about how we are governed in a very different way and stop thinking about trying to continue to govern this country in ways that just don't work in the 21st century. We are not in the 1950s anymore, Mr. Harper. And those kind of methods just do not work. We have to have a completely different paradigm of political thought. And that is embodied in what Bruce is trying to do. And politics used to be called an honorable profession. And there were people there that had honor. And honor is one of those nebulous characteristics that people have a hard time putting a finger on exactly what it is. Honor is that feeling inside when you know that you are doing something for the good of everybody and not for your own personal self-interest. Honor is being able to take what is good inside of you and be able to pass that on to future generations of Canadians. And honorable people do that. And Bruce, in attempting to do this, is an honorable person and is worthy of my respect and of yours as well. And at this point, I would like to introduce the Honourable Independent MP from Thunder Bay, the Honourable Bruce Hyer.
My goodness, I don't have to give my speech now, John just gave it. Good morning, Green Party members. Good morning, Ms. May. I would like to thank you so much, very, very much, for inviting me and Margaret to join you this weekend. We are very honored to be here, and as a bonus, Elizabeth has lined up some nice people here to take us on some aquatic tours that we're looking forward to. Ronald Reagan is a tough act to follow. I was here last night. That was a truly amazing evening. I hadn't seen that video before. Somebody tell me where I can borrow it, or buy it rather. And but I'm glad I was here to hear it. It was really quite something. So he's a hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. I bring bad news and I bring good news. And so I'm going to try to get the bad news out of the way quickly so that we can move on to the good news. I'm kind of halfway between the two people that were up here before. Elizabeth May, as you know, is on drugs, and you all know what the drug is. It's called hopium. So, bad news. Parliament, as Jack Layton said, is broken. Next, the rich are getting richer, while the poor and the middle class are struggling. Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett, a couple of years ago, wrote a book which you must get, you must read. I've bought 13 copies and given them away, and I'm out of that budget now, so you'll have to buy your own. It's called The Spirit Level, and the Spirit Level, you are very nice. The spirit level is not about metaphysics or religion. A spirit level in Britain is a metaphor for a carpenter's level. And so they're Brits, and so they've used that metaphor to describe the gaps in income in various rich countries and rank them from best to worst. The best 5 countries in the world by about 100 different parameters are the 4 Scandinavian countries and Japan. And guess what the worst one is by almost any parameter you can guess. No, it's not Canada. We're kind of in the middle, sliding toward the worst end of the scale. Somebody shout it out, you know. You got it. So, and unfortunately, recent OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, numbers are showing that we have in the last 5 years been sliding closer and closer to the US model. So as you know, I don't have to tell you, but I'll say it anyway, we have a dictatorial prime minister who puts the wants of big oil and big banks and multinational corporations and USA Republicans before the needs of the environment, before the needs of Canadian workers, before the needs of Canadian families. As far as I'm concerned, Stephen Harper is a traitor. Do you remember when Mr. Harper and Alberta were so incensed that Eastern Canada would actually want to have a national energy program? But now, do you know, I bet many of you know, but if you don't, China now has veto power over much of the refining that could take place in Canada rather than shipping raw bitumen to Canada, and the Harper government has signed on to that agreement. Very, very traitorous. Margaret and I have a son, Michael, and he just turned 17. And when he was 6 years old, we were riding in the car, and he said, "Dad, you've been fighting pollution your whole life, haven't you?" And I said, "Yes." And so he said, "Well, why do we do this? It's obvious we shouldn't be making pollution. Why don't we clean it up?" And so his biologist, environmentalist, ecologist dad did about a half an hour pedantic rant on the various reasons why we weren't cleaning up pollution. And he listened patiently to this. He's a very patient guy. He's like his mom. And he shared his simple formula with me. He said, "Dad, here's my formula. Pollution is equal to population times greed times stupidity." Yeah. That's pretty much what Ronald Wright said last night at his video, and afterwards, pretty much the same thing in more words. So after more than a decade of reflecting on what Michael said, I really haven't been able to improve on it. We're clearly in a mess, and the mess is spiraling out of control. We continue on with the ideology, the North American ideology, the more development and more markets and greed will solve all problems. We can continue to pursue a path that results in winners and losers. We can continue toward the goal of infinite growth. And as I think we know, that is the ideology of the cancer cell. Or we can smarten up. So we can decide on an optimum population for our planet, and then limit individual and collective greed to be sustainable for that population. Or, turning it around, we could set upper limits on greed and then figure out what a reasonable level of affluence is per capita, per country, both average and, as Ronald Wright said last night, maximum. And then we can tailor that population to stay within the Earth's carrying capacity. Hopefully, a carrying capacity. I was finding it ironic last night as Ronald Wright was talking and looking at his video, having all these jets going by. It's ironic again today, but I did come here on one. Hopefully that carrying capacity would be a carrying capacity that allows other species to thrive, not just humans. I really like Ronald Wright's idea of limits to gaps in income, and I, at some point, would like to pursue that further. Recently, I read David Suzuki and Holly Dressel's new book, More Good News. And they boil their formula down to as straightforward a quote that I'm going to read here as Michael's youthful formula. Quote, natural systems are not part of human culture. We are part of natural systems. The ecosystems that keep us alive pay no attention to human aspirations, needs, or laws. We must try to understand what forests and water bodies really need in order to maintain their ability to regulate this Earth's atmosphere and climate. Close quote. For years I've had my own little two simple formulas, and here they are. And they upset some groups that I've talked to where I say these formulas. I doubt they'll upset you. The first is ecosystems minus people equals ecosystems. I should already know what the second formula is. People minus ecosystems equals extinction. But you all understand that, that's why you're here today. You care, you understand, and you get involved. That's clear, listening to your story of your campaign and all the volunteers. And you take action. A simple concept that's an organizing principle for me to help me understand human society and my role in it as a parliamentarian is this. I sometimes divide humans simplistically into carers and non-carers. Most people are carers, I think we would agree. I also divide humans into doers and non-doers. And so my little model for the world that Elizabeth and I operate in is that the carer-doers struggle against the non-carer doers for the hearts and minds and votes of the rest of society. I'm very proud to be here today for many reasons, but a large part of it is because you are carers and you are doers, or you wouldn't be here today. And you are led and represented by one of the most superb carer-doers that I've ever met. Elizabeth May is setting a new and high standard in the House of Commons. That puts a lot of pressure on me as the guy that sits next to her there. She's smart, she's caring, she's loving, and she is the hardest working MP in the House of Commons. From where I sit next to her, Elizabeth is the leader who is putting our planet and our country ahead of party politics. For example, the House recently spent 23.5 hours voting on hundreds of amendments to Bill C-38. You know that, that's the bloated and draconian omnibus budget bill that even most of the conservative backbenchers didn't read. Elizabeth led the attempt to slow down the rush by the Harper Conservatives to sabotage seniors and poor folks and small businesses and First Nations and women's groups and workers and families, and especially our environment. I'm still marveling at how Elizabeth managed to stay in her seat. She did not get out of her seat for 23 and a half hours. She must to stop drinking water about 2 days ahead. She voted on every amendment. I missed a few. I had to go catch a nap or a pee break. She voted on every amendment, including a large number that she drafted personally, and many of you worked on as well. It was an incredible effort to make bad legislation better. It was a passionate attempt to get the Canadian media and Canadian voters to pay attention to the breathtaking assault on democracy and fairness and environmental legislation that has been developed carefully and slowly over many decades. But despite Elizabeth's Herculean efforts, not one amendment passed. The Conservative backbenchers, every single one of them, hooted and hollered, much like the chimps in that video last night. Their joy as they mindlessly killed every single amendment. Not a line, not a word, not a comma, not a semicolon was changed in Bill C-38. It was a disturbing display of mindless tribalism. With 39% of the vote, Harper and his Conservatives really believe that they possess 100% of the wisdom. There's philosopher Bertrand de Jouvenel who said a long time ago, "A nation of sheep will beget a government of wolves." Well, as you know, the wolf is at the door. So why are things such a mess? Recently, I decided to leave the NDP, as you know, and represent my constituents as an independent. The media and many partisans from many parties wondered aloud why anyone would give up the protection and the support offered by a strong political tribe, along with the rather attractive perks that go with it. I've lost some really snazzy perks. The Huffington Post asked me to write a blog on how I would fix Parliament, and I did that. And if you Google my name, Huffington Post, it'll pop up. And I won't read you all of it, but here's part of what I wrote. Quote, "All three main parties require lockstep discipline by MPs with little room for meaningful public debate or for putting constituents ahead of party politics. Fueled by our flawed and antiquated electoral system, where 39% of the vote can gain 100% of the power, the main parties are mired in a win-lose battlefield mentality. Instead of cooperation and compromise, our voters often observe mindless solidarity, where our tribe is always right and they are always wrong. I will no longer represent any party that whips, that is mandates, voting by their MPs, especially on issues not clearly laid out in agreed upon written policies or platforms, which means that none of the three main political parties is currently an option for me. Many Canadian voters share my disillusionment. 2 out of 5 eligible voters declined to even cast a ballot in the last election. It has become clear that our current political and electoral system often brings out the worst in politicians and in parties. Parliament is a mess. Can we fix it? Yes, I believe we can. So I'd like to read to you here my suggested 4-step plan to restore democracy to Parliament. 3 are really quick and simple. We could do them very easily. Well, maybe not easily, but quickly. And the 4th is definitely not. The first is randomized seating. We currently in the House of Commons sit in hockey-style party blocks with Elizabeth and I tucked in the back corner, waiting for our team captains to send us over the boards. Like hockey, some fans and media love the violence. Thoughtful journalists and voters long for civility, mutual respect, and meaningful debate. We can help fix this in a single week. Just sit us randomly in the House. We will sit next to them. We will get to know them. As people, parents, spouses, and fellow citizens who care about Canada, it will be much harder to hurl insults at colleagues sitting right beside you. Will facilitate open discussion between MPs and parties, and will result in voting more with our consciences or the wishes of our constituents rather than the whippings of party discipline. The second is riding level candidate approval. Most people don't seem to know what I'm about to tell you. Only since 1970, our flawed election laws have mandated that a candidate must have his or her nomination papers signed by his or her national party leader. That's not a problem for Elizabeth, but it is for some of us. From 1867, when the country was formed, to 1970, 103 years, we ran on just our names, our personal names, as voters actually had to know who we were, what we stood for, what our values were, and what party we belonged to. Since 1970, the national leaders have had a sword of Damocles to hold above the heads of MPs, and most use it. Believe me, I know. Unfortunately, the parties and the leaders don't trust the members in the riding to know who they prefer to represent them, or the voters in that riding to elect the best person. Pierre Trudeau described his own backbenchers as trained seals. Let's do away with that. There's a metaphor you can understand here in the Gulf Saanich Islands. Even if the local riding association picks a turkey, mixing metaphors here, let democracy work. Allow the voters to weed them out, or not. The riding association should sign our nomination papers, period. To underscore this, let me read to you a telling quote from Boss Tweed. Boss Tweed was an infamous American politician who was the boss, literally, of Tammany Hall, the political machine that ran New York City and New York State for most of the 19th century. He controlled political patronage, and he was convicted for stealing up to $200 million, in those days dollars, that's like $200 billion today, and he ended up, he died in jail. Here's what Boss Tweed said, and he would have understood Canadian politics for most parties. I don't care who does the electing, as long as I get to do the nominating. Yeah. So we have a system now where, for example, in Alberta, the real election is whoever gets selected to be the candidate in most of those conservative ridings. Yeah. My third idea is collaboration between parties, and I have actually introduced legislation in the last Parliament. I'm going to reintroduce it to allow co-sponsorship of private members' bills across party lines, which is currently not allowed. Bills are often branded now as the initiative of the party the member belongs to, and then it's opposed or defeated just because the idea came from them. Last Parliament, the 2009-2011 Parliament, out of 441 private members' bills, guess how many passed? 4. I'm acutely aware of this because one of them was mine. It was Bill C-311, my Climate Change Accountability Act, which many of you here helped on in a variety of ways, and I'd like to single one of them out for a claim here and give her a big hug and an atta-girl when you see her, and that's Michelle Meck. Michelle worked really hard to help me pass that bill. I have the dubious distinction, I'm going to go down in history, not only for leaving the NDP, but I have the dubious distinction of authoring and fostering the only bill in the history of Canada to be killed in the Senate with no debate, no consideration, no committee work of any kind, the Harper-controlled, unelected, unaccountable Senate. Sad. Now, the fourth and big one. This is the big one. We will never have any, and you know this, but I have to say it. We will never have any real democracy in Canada until we have a truly democratic electoral system. That means some kind of proportional representation. There's lots of ways to do this. There are about 100 democracies in the world, and most of them have some kind of proportional representation, and only a handful of them use our antiquated British first-past-the-post or winner-take-all system. The 5 Brit colonies that use this antiquated system are Britain itself, the USA, Canada, India, and, wait for it, Zimbabwe. Where in each riding the voters' vote affects only the outcome in that single riding. Thomas Jefferson, gotta remember I'm a former American, I gotta I'm an American by accident, I'm a Canadian by choice. Thomas Jefferson wrote this: "A democracy is nothing more than mob rule, where 51% of the people can take away the rights of the other 49. Well, unfortunately, here in Canada, things are even worse, where 1/3 of the votes can result in taking away the rights of the other 2/3 of the voters. So most modern democracies, as you know, have a hybrid electoral system where parliaments are elected, where most parliamentarians are elected directly, but some are elected indirectly to result in proportional representation and real democracy. And they result usually in some kind of coalition government, which actually requires collaboration and cooperation and compromise. Just imagine if here in Canada, if 20% of the nation's voters voted for the Purple Party. And the Purple Party actually got 20% of the seats. Right now, as you know, Stephen Harper is dictating through what I call a false majority. And so every single time if you watch CPAC, you watch again and again, you know, Elizabeth has a good idea or somebody has a good idea and they say, why don't you guys consider this idea? And they say, listen, we got a majority of the seats and we have a mandate to do what we want. And I get up every time and say, no, you didn't get a majority, you got a false majority. There's a professor named Vaughan Lyon from Trent University in his book Power Shift who wrote the following, quote, "That's not the kind of representation Canadians want. A genuine representative democracy would enable Canadians to play a much more significant and responsible role in determining the actions of government through MPs actually representing them." 83% of Canadians have told pollsters they thought constituency rather than party representation would greatly improve the quality of political life. It didn't get projected. Oh, it was projected. Okay, great. Projected over here is a graphic showing what makeup we have in Parliament today on one side, and on the other side, what we voted for and what we should have. If we had real democracy, here's what Canadians voted for in the 2011 election. Conservatives should have only 122 seats versus the current 167 that they hold. And as you know, we're about to have 338 seats, which I call adding deck chairs to the Titanic. The NDP should have had 94 seats, but it got 102 because right now it's somewhat of a regional party. The Liberals should have had 58 seats instead of the 34 that they got. And the Greens, as you know, should have had 12 seats versus the one that they got. That's not all. There should have been, based on the votes last time, there should have been 3 independents in the House of Commons, not just one. So, with proportional representation, strategic voting would no longer be necessary. In the case of the Greens, I have absolutely no doubt that you would not have 12 seats based on the last election if we had proportional representation. You'd have a lot more than 12 seats because, as you know, so many people have given up voting or they vote strategically because they fear a conservative government. And so I think you'd have more like 20, 25, or heaven knows how many seats if we'd had proportional representation. If I can only do one thing, in my remaining time in politics, it will be to somehow, I don't know how yet, but somehow pull off gaining some kind of reasonable proportional representation. Now, you're going to like this one. I truly believe, Mr. Independent, former NDP here, I really believe that a parliament with more Green MPs will be a much better parliament. We need more Green MPs desperately. You have to clone Elizabeth. One of my favorite authors, if you've never read one of his very funny and incisive books, do it, Edward Abbey, said, "A patriot must be always ready to defend his country against his government." So, now I'm getting to the good news part. You are the good news. You are the true patriots. I've gone over your platform, your green vision, with a fine-tooth comb. and I found very little to disagree with and much to admire and applaud. You have a fantastic platform. You have the best platform. And you have an amazing leader who's showing how she can put Canada first, and the environment first. And I'm very proud to call Elizabeth my fellow parliamentarian. So Elizabeth and Greens, you are on the right track. Hang in there. We need you to help save our parliament, to help save our country, and to help save our planet. Margaret and I are very grateful of your kind invitation to join you this weekend. I hope to talk with some of you as I'm here. Thanks for coming. Thank you very much for doing what you do. Nathan almost made it. I think he's probably the leader in waiting. And I agree with Nathan that we really need to find a way to cooperate. And even if we only did it for one election, if we found some creative way to get the coalition government that we need to defeat the horrible government that we have now, and then use that to get proportional representation, better electoral system. It's the only way out of the cost. Dave, you know me for a long time, and you know that I've always been kind of a green lib Democrat. So I don't fit neatly into any of the parties, but I sure hope that we figure out a way to get better cooperation from all the parties that really care about the future of Canada. I tell my 17-year-old son who's entering the dating game regularly, I say, Michael, find yourself a really, really smart woman, smart, kind woman, and listen to her all the time and do what she says most of the time. Well, I have a couple of really smart women in my life. One of them is Margaret, my wife, who gives me lots of great advice. And so when I'm back in Thunder Bay, I get a lot of great advice from Margaret. And when I'm on the Hill, I have a seatmate who gives me great advice, and I take a lot of it most of the time. Now, I've handed my voters and my constituents quite a shock. They elected a new Democrat. And not all of them love Bruce Hyer, or really wanted Bruce Hyer. They like Jack, or they like the NDP, or they're lifelong NDP members, or whatever. So what's happened here is that the Liberals and Conservatives in Thunder Bay, this is a great excuse and opportunity to kick Hyer, and they've been doing it. And for the people who cared more about the party than me, they're not very happy. So I've made a promise to myself and to my constituents quite publicly that for at least a year I'm going to remain an independent. So I'm going to reflect on this for a year. Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Well, really, I don't know how long you will stay independent, but I think I probably speak for most of us here. I think Elizabeth is not alone as a Green MP in the House, and I thank you for that.
I have another really smart woman in my life. It's my mom, Mary Lee Long Hyer. She lives in Connecticut. She's getting physically frail, but her mind is sharp. She beats us at Jeopardy, Upwards, Scrabble, card games, and she's really sharp. So she's been following all this. So she called me up one day and she said, you know, Bruce, you're probably even more effective as an independent supporting Elizabeth than you would be as a Green. So, as you're thinking about this, don't forget that.
You can tell I love Bruce. We've known each other for a long time. We met when he was fighting budworm spraying in the Thunder Bay area, and I was the, budworm queen of activism in Cape Breton Island, and a mutual friend put us together by phone so I could help him fight an aerial insecticide spray program. So we've known each other a long time, and obviously I'd be over the moon to double the size of our caucus. I kind of go to sleep sometimes dreaming of the headline, Green Party gets Hyer. These things come to me. But I know he has to make his own decisions, and it's really important to respect the will and the wishes of his constituents. But there's a limited time offer to double our caucus because the Calgary Centre by-election is coming up soon. So you may have to wait until you're in a position to just up it by a third. But in any case, I want to thank you for being here, and this is a little token from a local artist, Rick Silas. It is an ice representation of our melting polar world, but it is quite beautiful. And I really want to just ask you all to join us. I'm going to say one more thing before everybody applauds. There will be coffee provided in the back of the hall by the parishioners. It's a fundraiser for St. Andrew's Church, which is the church located right next door to my riding office. Okay, I admit it, I'm a parishioner too. Okay, so you can get your coffee and homemade treats made by the parishioners of St. Andrew's Church. And now I'm going to ask you to join me again in thanking one of the finest, most decent, hardworking, dedicated people I've ever met.